At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. The twin sons of Koros beat down on the rust-colored dust, bleaching the sky to a hazy, pale orange. The light offered a dry, oppressive heat, illuminating a landscape of cracked earth and skeletal rock spires that clawed at the horizon. On this forgotten moon, gravity was a mild inconvenience, and water was a treasured commodity. Only one settlement of any note clung to the surface, a sprawling collection of prefabricated habitats and scavenged ship hulls fused by desperation and spot welders, known as Oxide. And at the heart of Oxide stood the Sump. The name was an old joke that had soured into fact. The Sump was the only cantina still functional, a squat blockhouse of reinforced plasteel, its walls solid sheets against the dust storms that leaned against the colossal, silent struts of a decommissioned orbital docking clamp. The air inside was a dense stew of alien smoke, spilled liquor, and the low-frequency hum of a strained life support system. It carried the sharp smell of burnt insulation, cheap synthale, and regret. Jedediah Finch pushed through the screeching, pressurized door and paused, blinking as he adjusted to the gloom. The cantina's muted chaos washed over him, the clatter of dice on a metal table, the rowdy, guttural laughter of a four-throated gralloch, the tinny, looping melody of some forgotten Earth folk song played on a synthesized string instrument. He was an anomaly, a species from the core systems this far out on the fringe. Human. The word itself was a story told to frighten young broodlings. He moved toward the bar, the worn leather of his duster whispering against his legs. His boots were silent on the grime-caked deck plates. A man in his late 40s, his face lined from the suns of a dozen systems, his pale blue eyes held a patient stillness that observed the cantina's chaos. He took a seat at the bar's far end, a spot with a clear view of the entrance that kept his back to a solid wall, an ingrained habit. The sessile jelloid behind the bar retracted several translucent tentacles. A thick column of gelatinous flesh fused its body to the spot. Its single large eye swiveled toward him.
"What will it be, stranger?"
It bubbled, its voice a wet, synthesized sound. "Whiskey," Jedediah said. His own voice was a low rasp that seemed to absorb the noise around it. "If you have it." The jelloid rippled in a gesture like a shrug.
"Got the synth equivalent. Burns the same on the way down."
It slid a cloudy, smudged glass across the pitted countertop. Jedediah caught it by feel. He laid a few chipped credits with scrubbed cereals on the bar, more than enough to cover the drink and an hour of silence. He took a slow sip. The synth whiskey was a chemical fire that tasted of burnt plastic and solvents, but it was a familiar burn. He was here for fuel, for minor repairs, for a brief stop on a long road. His pilgrimage was a quiet, solitary affair, a promise made to a ghost a galaxy away. He nursed his drink, staring into the distance, his mind charting the next leg of his journey through the star charts burned into his memory. He wanted to be another piece of worn-out flotsam that had washed up at the sump before the tide carried it away again. Koros offered only harsh light and unwanted attention.
Well, look what the stellar winds blew in."
The voice was a loud, grating bellow, sloshing with confidence as cheap as his ale. Jedediah kept his focus forward. He had heard that exact tone in 1,000 tongues on 100 worlds. A gravidon, a bipedal creature from a high-gravity world, all dense muscle and thick bone, slammed a heavy three-fingered hand down on the bar next to his glass, rattling it. Tough, gray hide sheathed his body, and small, cruel eyes sank deep in a fleshy face. He was broad and brutish, wearing a patchwork of scavenged armor plates that strained across a swelling gut. This was Klisk. His reputation preceded him as the local alpha, the leader of a small, grubby pack of thieves and enforcers who called the Sump their territory. 2 of his crew flanked him, their expressions ranging from fawning eagerness to bored indifference.
"I'm talking to you, soft skin.
Klisk growled, his breath a noxious cloud of fermented spore pods.
You lost? Your kind is rare out this far.
Jedediah took another sip of his drink and fixed his gaze on the far wall. No. The simple, one-word denial seemed to enrage Klisk more than any insult. He thrived on fear, on vocal submission. This quiet stillness was a language beyond his comprehension, and his frustration grew.
So you're a quiet one, are ya?
Klisk sneered, leaning closer.
We got a rule here. Strangers who want a quiet drink gotta pay the silence tax. It's a new rule. I just made it up.
Jedediah turned his head, a deliberate motion, meeting Klisk's gaze. He looked only tired, as if facing a predictable problem.
I paid the bartender. He's not me,
Klisk said, puffing out his chest.
I'm the one who makes sure this place stays functional.
He jabbed a thumb at his own chest.
My crew and me, we're the law here.
Jedediah glanced past Klisk to the rest of his crew, who gathered closer, forming a loose, menacing semicircle. A Volan, a slender, flight-capable female with 2 primary arms and a smaller secondary pair of manipulators folded at her chest, watched the proceedings with the look of cynical resignation. Next to her, a hulking gestalt being, a colony of smaller life forms held in a tough, leathery membrane that rippled with subtle internal motion, stood impassively. And hovering at the back was a small, wiry creature with enormous swiveling ears and dark, reflective eyes. His long fingers twitched with a mixture of excitement and terror. Jedediah looked back to Klisk.
I'm just passing through.
Too late for that,
Klisk grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. He squinted, and he caught the faint glint of silver at Jedediah's neck. A tarnished locket on a simple chain hung just inside the collar of his shirt.
What's that you got there? Something shiny.
Before Jedediah could react, Klisk shot his hand out and snatched the chain, yanking the locket free. It swung in the dim light, its surface worn smooth by the touch of a thumb over countless years. Jedediah's posture changed. The weariness evaporated, replaced by something cold and absolute. He moved his hand from the bar to his side, his fingers brushing the worn wooden grip of his holstered revolver. The cantina's noise faltered. Patrons glanced over, sensing the shift from drunken banter to something dangerous.
Give it back,
Jedediah said. His voice, though quiet as before, carried a new weight that cut through the bar's hum. Klisk laughed, a wet, choking sound. He held the locket up, squinting at it.
What's so special about this piece of junk? Got your mommy's picture in it, human?
The Volan behind him shifted her weight.
Klisk,
she said, her voice a dry rasp.
Leave it. He's not worth the mess. Quiet, Quill,
Klisk snapped, his focus on Jedediah.
I'm handling this.
He dangled the locket in front of Jedediah's face.
I think I'll keep it as a little trinket for my collection.
Jedediah locked his gaze on the locket. Every line on his face seemed to deepen.
That's my last warning.
Klisk crossed the line. His arrogance had pushed him past any chance of backing down. To yield now, in front of his crew and the entire cantina, was to lose the throne of fear he had built for himself. His grin vanished, replaced by a snarl of genuine malice.
Warning? Warnings are my business. I'm the one who gives them.
He spat. He reached for the energy pistol holstered at his own hip. The weapon was a bulky, over-designed piece of military surplus, humming with contained power.
You're gonna learn some respect, soft skin.
The bartender oozed below the countertop. The Gralloch's laughter had died in his 4 throats. The only sound was the looping, mournful melody from the cantina's sound system. Klisk fumbled for his weapon, a clumsy motion full of bravado. The energy pistol whined as it powered up, its charging coils glowing an angry, menacing blue. He leveled it at Jedediah's chest.
Now,
Klisk began, his voice triumphant.
You going to...
Jedediah dropped his hand, gripped his revolver, and drew in a single fluid arc. The heavy, archaic weapon cleared its leather holster with a soft shush. The hammer fell. The sound was a deafening chemical crack, a concussive roar of controlled explosion that ripped through the cantina's quiet. The visceral, physical sound was a throwback to an earlier, more violent age of physics. A flash of fire, a wisp of gray smoke. Klisk's triumphant expression froze, replaced by one of profound comical surprise. A small, neat hole appeared in the center of his chest, right through the thickest part of his scavenged armor. The humming of his energy pistol died as his finger slackened on the trigger. He looked down at the hole, then back up at Jedediah, his mouth moving without sound. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, a dead weight of muscle and stupidity, hitting the deck with a wet, final thud. The locket, released from his grasp, clattered to the floor. A ringing silence filled the cantina. Everyone watched the human, who stood still, his revolver level, a thin tendril of smoke curling from its barrel. He drew, aimed, and fired with the calm, unhurried focus of a master craftsman. Jedediah lowered the weapon. He bent down, his knees cracking, and retrieved the silver locket from the floor. He wiped it clean on his sleeve, the motion gentle, almost reverent, before tucking it back beneath his shirt. He stood, holstered his revolver, and turned back to his half-finished drink. Klisk's crew reacted, breaking the spell. They moved as one, with a strange, uncertain purpose. They fanned out, surrounding him. The hulking gestalt, Grond, loomed over him, and clenched his hands into fists. The fidgeting creature, Vetch, darted to the side, his large ears flickering wildly as he processed the scene. And the Volan, Quill, stepped forward, her primary arms crossed over her narrow chest, her sharp, deep-set eyes appraising the human with a new, startling intensity. Jedediah met her gaze, ready for the coming fight. 5 rounds remained. It would be messy, but it would probably be enough. Quill kept her weapons holstered. She stared at him, then glanced down at Klisk's cooling body, and then back up. A long, telling moment passed.
Well,
She said, her voice as dry as Koros dust.
that's that then.
She turned to the others.
You saw it. A clean challenge. Single combat.
Grond rumbled, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor plates. It sounded like agreement. Vetch just squeaked and nodded frantically. Quill turned back to Jedediah.
By the crew's code, Klisk's code, a rule that Fat Lizard was always happy to enforce, leadership passes to the victor.
Jedediah frowned, the lines around his eyes deepening. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about you.
Quill stated, gesturing to him with one of her upper hands.
Congratulations, human. You're our new leader.
Jedediah stared at her. No, he said the word flat and final. I'm not. He pushed the credits across the bar, a silent signal to the still-hidden Jelloid that their business was concluded. He turned to leave, his only thought to get to his ship, refuel, and put this entire moon in his rearview mirror. Grond shifted, blocking his path. The Gestalt was an absolute monolith, and his presence was a simple geological fact. He was just there, waiting for an order from his new leader. I am not your leader, Jedediah repeated, his voice tight with restrained annoyance. He looked at Quill. I killed your boss because he was a drunken fool with a death wish. That's the end of it. Now get your living fortress to move. Quill's expression was a mixture of exasperation and grim amusement.
It isn't that simple. The code is the only thing that holds this crew together. We're just scavengers waiting for someone to pick us off otherwise. Klisk is dead. You killed him. You're in charge.
I have no desire to be in charge, Jedediah said, his patience wearing thin. I have my own path.
And we have ours,
Quill shot back.
And right now they've collided.
She stepped closer, lowering her voice.
Look, human, what do I even call you?
Jed, he clipped out. Jedediah Finch.
Jedediah Finch,
She repeated, tasting the name.
Fine. Look, Jed, you misunderstand the kind of trouble you just stepped in. Killing Klisk was more than a barroom brawl. You just inherited his problems, all of them.
She led him away from the gawking patrons toward a darkened booth in the corner. Grond and Vetch followed with the silent obedience of trained animals. Jedediah went reluctantly, knowing this ended one way. They sat, the four of them. Quill leaned forward, her deep-set eyes intense.
Our credit balance is negative,
She said, her voice a low, urgent whisper.
our rations are down to reconstituted spore wafers and whatever vermin Vetch can catch. A local fixer has marked us.
Vetch squeaked, his ears twitching furiously.
Marked! Klisk paid off a local fixer, borrowed heavy, and defaulted. There's a price on his head, and now it's on all of ours by association. And now, thanks to you, it's on yours too. And our only way out,
Quill continued, picking up the thread.
our one last desperate chance to get off this rock and clear our debts, was a plan Klisk cooked up. A big score.
Jedediah raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. It's a terrible plan.
It's a suicide note with diagrams,
Quill admitted.
but it was all we had. We planned to hit it in 3 of this moon's sunrises. Now, with no leader, the plan is dead.
Jedediah felt a familiar, sinking feeling. That sounds like your problem. Her gaze hardened.
We're making it your problem.
She said, her tone losing its percussive edge and gaining a sharp steel core.
Here's the offer, Jedediah Finch. You have 2 choices. The first, you lead us. You take Klisk's plan, you make it work, and you ensure we all receive our cut. We split the score, and you can go on your merry way, richer and with a loyal crew who will sing your praises across the sector.
And choice 2? Jed asked, already dreading the answer.
Choice 2
Quill said, a predatory light in her eyes.
is we drag Klisk's body to the local corporate constabulary. We tell them we saw the whole thing. A cold-blooded murder. An unprovoked attack by a dangerous off-world human. They'll lock you up, throw away the key, and impound your ship. We'll claim the bounty on you ourselves. It's less than the big score, but it's enough to get us off-world.
Jedediah was silent for a long moment. He was a human, an outsider whose word meant little on a corporate-run fringe world. His word against 3 locals? He looked at each of them in turn. Vetch was vibrating with anxiety, clearly terrified of the entire situation, but following Quill's lead. Gron's expression was unreadable, but his loyalty was a palpable force in the air, a loyalty now directed, however absurdly, at Jed. And then there was Quill, smart, pragmatic, and ruthless. She held all the cards and played them with confidence. It's not much of a choice, he said at last.
It's the only one you've got,
She countered.
So, what's it going to be, boss?
The word hung in the air between them, laced with sarcasm and a genuine question. Jedediah looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of his life. He thought of his ship, of the long journey still ahead of him, of the promise he still had to keep. This detour blocked his path with Gron's bulk and Quill's sharp logic. He let out a long, slow breath, the air hissing through his teeth. Fine, he said, the word tasting like ash. Take me to your hideout. I want to see this plan. The hideout was a cavernous, forgotten cargo bay deep within the old docking clamp's bowels, accessible only through a maze of maintenance tunnels. The air was stale, smelling of scorched steel, lubricant, and the Gestalt's loamy biological scent. The detritus of a dozen failed ventures cluttered the space. Piles of scavenged parts, half-repaired droids, empty ration packets, and a single flickering holotable in the center of the room. Quill tapped a sequence on the table's control panel, and a 3-dimensional schematic shimmered into life. It depicted a section of elevated gravrail track suspended over a deep canyon. A sleek, armored train appeared on the track.
The target,
Quill announced.
is the astrodynamic weekly cryo-helium transport. It runs from the mining outpost at the serrated ridge to the main refinery here at Oxide. Always on schedule, always the same route.
Vetch darted forward, his ears twitching as he gestured at the hologram.
It's a fortress on rails! Automated plasma turrets, drone patrols, reinforced hull plating, and a command car full of heavily armored corporate enforcers. And inside,
Quill continued, ignoring Vetch's panicked outburst.
are 20 pressurized containers of refined cryohelium, the purest stuff in the sector, worth a fortune in the open market, more than enough to clear our debts and set us all up for life.
Jedediah studied the hologram, his expression impassive.
Show me Klisk's plan.
Quill's jaw plates tightened in something akin to embarrassment. She manipulated the controls, and a series of crude, aggressive arrows in red appeared on the schematic. They all pointed directly at the front of the train.
Klisk's grand strategy,
She said, her voice dripping with scorn.
was a frontal assault. The plan was to block the track, wait for the train to stop, and then charge it head on, hoping to overwhelm the guards before the turrets shredded us to pieces.
Jedediah stared at the hologram for a full minute, his silence a damning critique. He reached out and, with a single swipe of his hand, dismissed the holographic arrows.
This isn't a plan,
he said, his voice cold and flat.
It's a eulogy. You'll be dead in the first 30 seconds. Automated turrets linked to proximity sensors would have cut you down before you got within 100 meters. If by some miracle you survived that, the guards would have suited up and waited for you at the reinforced forward hatch. You would have been running into a kill box.
Vetch shuddered. Grond rumbled, a low note of confusion. He had readied himself to follow Klisk into that meat grinder. Quill nodded, her earlier cynicism validated.
I told him as much. He said I lacked vision.
He lacked a brain,
Jedediah corrected her. He looked around the dusty bay.
Do you have a physical topographical map of the area? A real one, paper or synth fabric, not a hologram.
Vetch scoffed.
A physical map? That's ancient tech. Everything is digital.
Enemies can ghost, jam, or manipulate holograms. Physical maps tell the truth,
Jedediah said, his expression firm.
Find one.
Quill gave Vetch a sharp look, and the creature scurried off, muttering about archaic data formats. He returned a few minutes later, blowing a thick layer of dust off a rolled-up tube of synth fabric. He unfurled a highly detailed survey map of the Chorus Canyons on a nearby workbench, crisscrossed with contour lines, elevation markers, and geological notations. Jedediah leaned over it, and he traced the path of the grav rail. He fell silent, his mind processing the terrain, the angles, the physics of the situation. The reluctant captive vanished, replaced by a tactician in his element. Quill watched him, a new grudging respect in her eyes. Vetch fidgeted. Grond stood perfectly still, watching the human with a placid patience. Jedediah tapped the map. His finger rested on a specific point miles before the intended ambush site, where the canyon walls narrowed and the track descended in a series of sharp switchbacks to navigate a steep drop in elevation.
Here,
he said. The word was a quiet command.
This is where we hit them.
Quill leaned in, her sharp eyes scanning the map.
Serpent's Coil? The track has the most exposure there, but the train will be moving at maximum velocity through the turns. A direct assault is suicide.
We're bypassing an assault,
Jedediah said, a new energy in his voice, the focused intensity of a predator who has found the weak point in its prey's defenses.
We're using physics, not force.
He sketched on the map with a grease pencil he produced from a pocket in his duster, moving with confident purpose.
Klisk's mistake was thinking of the train as a fortress to storm. It's a projectile on a fixed trajectory. It has mass, it has velocity, and therefore it has inertia.
He drew a line from a high ridge overlooking the track.
Vetch, you're a slicer. You have access to sonic emitters?
Low-frequency geological survey charges,
Vetch squeaked.
I can calibrate them. Why?
You will plant them here,
Jedediah said, tapping the ridge.
You will trigger a small calculated landslide, enough to obstruct the track while keeping it intact. An annoyance.
An annoyance?
Vetch asked, bewildered.
The train's forward sensors will vaporize it in a second.
Exactly, Jedediah replied. But protocol will demand the train slow and deploy a security drone to inspect the track for structural damage. A minor procedural delay. And while the train slows and their attention focuses forward on the annoyance,
He drew a new line, this one descending from a cliff overhang directly above the track in the middle of the serpent's coil.
We'll be here, rappelling onto the roof while the train is at its slowest.
Quill blinked as the shape of the plan formed in her mind. It was audacious and completely unexpected.
We avoid the forward guns entirely,
Jedediah continued, tracing a path along the top of the train.
We enter through a dorsal maintenance hatch. Grand, you'll be our can opener. We move through the service corridors, avoiding the main compartments. We avoid the guards. We go straight for the vault.
A phase energy field protects the vault!
Vetch protested.
I've studied the schematics. They're from a corporate data leak 2 ore shipments ago, so they may have inaccuracies. Patrol routes could have shifted, but the vault hardware is unchanged. It's on a closed circuit. There's no way to slice it.
You can shut down anything that uses power,
Jedediah said calmly.
Quill, you're the mechanic. Can you modify a standard EMP device? I need something focused. A pulse I can tune to a specific cycle.
Quill considered it for a moment, her secondary manipulators twitching as she mentally disassembled and reassembled the device.
It's possible. I could rig a directional capacitor. But what cycle? And how would we know it?
We'll watch,
Jedediah said.
Older corporate energy fields have a power cycle. They draw massive energy, then there's a fractional pause before the next draw. You can see it if you know where to look. A slight flicker in the conduits that power it will time the EMP's discharge to that pause. It should overload the capacitors and force a hard reset. It should give us a window, a second, maybe 2, to get through the physical lock behind it.
He stepped back from the table, his plan laid bare. The scheme involved misdirection, timing, and focus, relying on psychology and physics instead of brute force. Vetch stared at the map, his large ears drooping slightly.
It's all analog,
he whispered in disbelief.
Rock slides, ropes, staring at energy flickers, a pry bar.
He looked up at Jed. His wide, dark eyes held a strange mix of skepticism and awe.
It's insane.
Insane was charging a plasma turret with a handheld blaster,
Jedediah countered.
This is just work.
Quill looked from the map to the human. Klisk had led through bellowing commands and threats. This quiet, weathered man led with cold, inescapable logic. Her stance shifted, a flicker of something new in her sharp eyes.
All right, Jedediah Finch,
she said, a new tone of genuine respect in her voice.
Let's get to work.
The hours before the heist passed in a flurry of activity. The dusty hideout became a workshop. The clang of metal and hum of electronics filled the space, a focused energy replacing the former chaos. Jedediah moved between them, a quiet overseer. He gave suggestions, asked pointed questions, and observed. His presence alone seemed to sharpen their focus. In one corner, Vetch hunched over a workbench, his delicate fingers darting across the control panel of a sonic emitter. While a diagnostic ran, he switched to their skiff's passive sensor feed.
Picking up a faint encrypted data burst piggybacking on the port's public network,
he muttered.
Probably automated network handshakes, but it's persistent.
Filter it out,
Quill said, her focus on her work.
We have more pressing matters than data bursts.
Vetch shrugged and complied, channeling his nervous energy back into calibrating the sonic charges. Quill, meanwhile, had completely disassembled an EMP generator, its components spread across a large tarp. She performed the delicate soldering with her primary hands, while her smaller secondary pair held components steady, and she worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon. She built the directional capacitor Jedediah had described, winding fine copper wires around a custom-built focusing cone. Grond sat in the center of the bay, a massive steel girder laid across his lap. With a high tensile rasp, he was sharpening one end of the girder into a wicked flattened point. The sound of metal on metal was a slow, rhythmic grinding beat that underscored the other, more frantic preparations. Every few minutes, he would stop, hum a low, resonant note of appraisal, and then continue his work. His labor held a simple, profound dignity. He was the muscle, but he was also a craftsman preparing his tool. Jedediah sat apart from them near the hideout's entrance, where a sliver of Korra's harsh sunlight cut through the gloom. He had disassembled his revolver on a clean cloth. The revolver was a beautiful, archaic piece of machinery, a relic of a bygone era. Beside the components lay a compact, hand-cranked ammunition press and several small canisters of unmixed chemical propellant. Each component, the cylinder, the frame, the barrel, the intricate clockwork of the trigger mechanism, showed wear, but he had maintained it impeccably. He cleaned each piece with reverence, moving with a familiarity born of a lifetime of repetition. The silver locket lay open on the cloth beside the gun parts. Quill, walking past to retrieve a power converter, glanced down. She caught only a fleeting glimpse of the image inside, a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a man who looked like a younger, less haunted version of Jedediah. They held a small child between them. Before Quill could process the image, Jedediah snapped the locket shut with a soft click. He kept his gaze averted, and the muscles in his jaw tightened. The man before her was more than a reluctant leader or a deadly gunslinger. A loss she could only guess at defined him. She respected the boundary, turning away and leaving him to his ghosts. With the revolver reassembled, Jedediah turned his attention to his ammunition. He broke open the cylinder, letting the 5 remaining cartridges fall onto the cloth. He then opened the small leather pouch on his belt and added the single final round he had kept in reserve. 6 polished, hand-loaded cartridges lay before him. He had started his journey with 50 rounds. Now he had 6. Each one was a choice. He checked the primer on each cartridge before loading 5 back into the cylinder, leaving one chamber empty, an old habit. The lost cartridge went back into the pouch. When their preparations were complete, they loaded their gear onto a rusty, battered desert skiff. As they floated out of the docking clamp and into the ochre twilight of the canyons, the earlier tension between them eased into a shared focus. They traveled for an hour, the skiff's repulsor lifts humming a steady, monotonous tune as they skimmed over the cracked and barren landscape. Quill was at the controls, navigating the winding canyons. Jedediah sat beside her, his gaze on the horizon, his revolver resting comfortably on his lap.
I've never seen a weapon like that outside a museum archive anyway,
Quill said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet, lacking its usual sarcastic bite.
Why that weapon?
Jedediah ran a thumb over the revolver's worn frame.
It's predictable, he replied, his voice a low murmur. It relies on simple mechanics. A power cell can drain, a focusing lens can crack. This is just metal, chemistry, and physics. When I pull the trigger, I know exactly what it will do. Every time.
Quill considered his words. In a universe of unreliable technology, of energy shields that flickered and plasma conduits that blew, that kind of certainty held a profound appeal. This was the same logic he applied to their plan, relying on predictable, immutable laws over the fickle whims of high technology. The philosophy of a man who now put his faith only in tangible certainties. Her respect for him deepened.
What about the locket?
She asked, her voice even softer, probing the boundary she'd earlier respected. Jedediah was silent for a long moment.
That's predictable, too,
he said, his gaze on the distant, jagged peaks.
It reminds me of what happens when you're not there to pull the trigger.
The answer landed with a crushing weight that silenced her. She looked ahead into the gathering dark, understanding now that his journey was an act of penance. They reached the Serpent's Coil as the twin suns began their final descent, painting the canyon walls in fiery shades of crimson and gold. Vetch, looking even smaller and more anxious than usual, disembarked with his pack of sonic emitters and a remote detonator. He gave Jedediah a nervous look from his wide eyes.
Just like we planned,
Jed said, his voice calm and reassuring.
Plant the charges, get to the overlook, and wait for my signal.
Vetch nodded, unable to speak, and scurried up the rock face with an agility that belied his usual anxiety. Jed, Quill, and Grond continued to the designated overhang, a massive shelf of rock that jutted out directly over the grav rail tracks. They anchored their rappelling lines, checking the carabiners and tension locks twice. Grond moved with a surprising lack of encumbrance, the massive steel girder he had sharpened slung across his back with a heavy-duty harness. Below them, the canyon plunged into deep shadow. The wind whistled a low, mournful tune through the rocks. Jed pulled a small, powerful monocular from his duster and scanned the horizon. The weight stretched. The only sounds were the wind and the thumping of their own hearts. Then a distant glimmer of light appeared, threading its way through the canyons.
Target is inbound,
He said, his voice calm over their short-range comms.
5 minutes to engagement.
He switched frequencies.
Vetch, you see them?
Affirmative!
Vetch crackled back over the comms, his voice tight with anxiety.
Oh, Void, it's so much bigger in person. Are you sure about this?
The plan is sound,
Jed said.
Trust the plan. Trust yourself. Wait for the signal.
The train grew larger, its sleek armored form slithering along the elevated track like a monstrous metal serpent. Its powerful headlights cut through the gathering dark.
It's entering the strait before the rock slide zone,
Quill reported, her own monocular pressed to her eye.
Moving fast.
Get ready,
Jed said. He tracked the train, his mind a running clock of speed and distance, waiting until the command car was halfway through the target zone.
Now, Vetch, do it now.
High on the opposite ridge, Vetch jammed his thumb down on the detonator. A deep, resonant thrum vibrated through the rock under their feet. A section of the cliff face seemed to liquefy, crumbling in a controlled fall of rock and dust. A pile of rubble, just large enough to be a credible threat, spilled onto the tracks. Miles away, the train's automated systems screamed a warning. Its powerful engines whined in protest as they engaged the braking system, the massive vehicle decelerating with a groan of stressed metal. Its forward plasma cannons swiveled and fired a single searing bolt, vaporizing the largest of the boulders, but the obstruction remained.
They're slowing.
Quill breathed, a note of wonder in her voice.
It's working.
A hatch opened on the train's flank, and a sleek, disc-shaped security drone emerged, hovering over the track to scan for damage. The entire train's attention focused on the minor inconvenience a mile ahead.
They've taken the bait,
Jed said, pulling on his gloves.
This is our window. Let's go.
One by one, they went over the edge, Jed leading with a smooth, controlled descent. The wind tore at him, the train a monstrous moving island of steel below. He landed with a soft thud on the roof, his mag boots locking onto the hull with a satisfying clank. Quill landed beside him a moment later, her light frame giving her an unnerving agility. Grond came last, landing with a heavy thump that made the whole car shudder. Heavy curved steel support struts, part of the train's external frame, crisscrossed the roof, providing excellent cover. They stayed low, moving with purpose toward the center of the car. Jed pointed to a large, sealed maintenance hatch.
Grond,
he said. The Gestalt understood instantly. He braced himself, jammed the sharpened end of his steel girder into the seam of the hatch, and heaved. For a moment, the hatch held. Then, with a deep, resonant groan of protesting metal, almost inaudible over the noise of the train and the wind, the hatch buckled. Grond grunted with effort, the colony within his membrane straining, and tore the heavy plate free, tossing it aside. A dark, square hole led down into the guts of the train. They had a way in. The service corridors were a tight, claustrophobic network of pipes, conduits, and humming machinery. The air was thick with electric heat from humming circuits. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, turning the cramped space into a disorienting maze. They moved in single file, Jed in the lead, his revolver drawn, Quill behind him, a multi-tool in one of her primary hands, and her modified EMP in another. Grond bringing up the rear, his bulk barely squeezing through the narrow passages. Vetch's panicked but helpful voice crackled in their ears from his perch high above, feeding them directions from a downloaded schematic of the train.
Take the next junction to your left,
Vetch whispered over the comms.
It should lead to a primary conduit channel running parallel to the cargo bay.
They rounded the corner and froze. Standing 20 feet away were two corporate security guards, their backs to them, checking a power relay panel. An unlisted patrol. Jed raised a single hand, signaling them to halt. His mind raced. A firefight here was suicidal. The noise would bring the entire train's security detail down on them in seconds. Vetch's voice came over the comms, tight with tension.
Hostiles ahead! Patrol! I knew it! The patrol routes have shifted! Hold position!
Vetch, quiet, Jed hissed. Can you access the lighting controls for this section?
The lighting? Yes! It's on a secondary grid! I can overload the circuit!
Do it,
Jed ordered. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the corridor into darkness. A guard cursed in surprise.
What the hell? Circuit blow?
In the blackness, Jed heard a soft rumble of movement behind him. Groaned. The massive gestalt pushed past him, his steps surprisingly quiet. There was a short, muffled scuffle, two soft thuds, and a grunt of immense effort. A few seconds later, the emergency lights flickered back on, their glow a sickly yellow. The two guards lay slumped on the floor, unconscious, their armor dented in the shape of Gron's dense fists. The gestalt stood over them, looking down at his handiwork with a simple, almost innocent expression of satisfaction. He had neutralized them with two swift, silent blows. Quill let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding.
Nice work, Grund!
The gestalt just rumbled. They pressed on, moving with renewed urgency. According to Vetch's directions, the vault was just ahead. They rounded a final corner and stopped dead. The scene matched the schematics exactly. A massive circular blast door, forged from a solid alloy, stood set into the bulkhead, and before it was a shimmering curtain of crackling power that distorted the air behind it.
That's it!
Quill breathed.
The vault!
The field is even stronger than the specs suggested!
Vetch crackled over the comms, full of digital static and real fear.
I'm detecting massive power draw! Be careful!
All right, Vetch,
Quill said, taking point.
do your thing! Try to slice it!
On it!
Vetch replied.
Attempting to bypass the primary security protocols. Finding a backdoor in the control software. Come on, you obsolete piece of junk!
A series of faint holographic code lines flickered across the surface of the vault door, a sign of Vetch's remote intrusion. For a moment, it seemed to be working as the wavering of the field intensified. Then a harsh, grating buzz echoed through the corridor. The holographic code vanished, replaced by a single glowing red icon, a stylized symbol of a shield.
Firewall!
Vetch shrieked in their ears.
It kicked me out! There was a secondary protocol not in the schematics. It must have tripped the silent alarm. It's broadcasting our position to the command car. They know we're here!
At that moment, the deck plates beneath their feet vibrated with a new intensity. The low hum of the train's engines pitched upward into a high-powered whine. The train was accelerating, violently.
They're bypassing a fight!
Quill realized with a jolt of horror.
They're running for the port and its reinforcements!
A speeding bullet, the train had trapped them with corporate soldiers closing in.
The plan holds,
Jed said, his voice a bedrock of calm in the rising storm of panic.
We get the door open. Quill, the EMP, now.
Quill scrambled forward, her earlier confidence shaken. She raised the modified device, its focusing cone aimed at the heart of the energy field. Jed moved to her side, his gaze fixed on the shimmering barrier.
The pulse is too stable,
She said, her voice strained.
I can't get a reading!
Look past the field,
Jed instructed, his voice low and steady.
Look at the air around it. Look at the conduits in the wall powering it. There.
He pointed. A thick bundle of cables running into the emitter array pulsed, and the air around them shimmered with a fractional flicker between each pulse.
There's your power cycle. Match it.
Quill focused, and she locked her deep-set eyes onto the pulsing light. She began tuning the EMP, a high-pitched whine emanating from the device as she adjusted its output.
I think I've got it!
On my mark,
Jed said, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver.
Gron, be ready.
The Gestalt braced himself, his girder held like a battering ram. "Fire!" Jed commanded. Quill squeezed the trigger. A concentrated beam of invisible energy shot from the device, striking the shimmering field. For a heartbeat, the field held. Then it erupted into a shower of brilliant blue sparks. It flickered violently, guttering like a spent flame, and for a fraction of a second, it vanished completely. "Now, Ground!" With a deafening roar, Grond charged, ramming the point of his girder into the massive locking mechanism at the center of the blast door. The train lurched as it hit a sharp curve, throwing them all against the wall, but Grond's footing held. He put his entire massive weight behind the girder, using it as a giant lever. Metal screamed in protest. With a final explosive bang, the lock shattered. The energy field flickered back into existence, but Grond had already compromised the vault door. Grond wrenched it open. Cold, misty air, smelling of liquid nitrogen, billowed out from the vault. Inside, 20 large cylindrical cryo-containers were locked into place, each one polished under the internal lighting. Their triumph was short-lived. The train accelerated again, so violently this time that it threw them off their feet. An alarm began to blare, a loud whooping siren that echoed through the corridors. Vetch screamed over the comms, laced with dawning horror.
It wasn't the alarm! That data burst from the port! It was a homing beacon! Someone tagged our skiff! He's been following us the whole time! I'm tracking another vessel! Closing fast!
The roof of the train car exploded inward in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. Figures in dark angular armor rappelled down through the newly opened hole, their plasma rifles already firing. Simultaneously, the doors at both ends of the corridor slid open, revealing more armed hostiles. Enemies surrounded them. The corridor became a maelstrom of plasma bolts and concussive reports. Jed kicked a loose panel up for cover, returning fire with his revolver, each shot a deafening crack in the enclosed space. Quill ducked behind a console, firing her small sidearm with one hand, while her other frantically tried to seal the vault door. Grond became a living shield, absorbing several plasma bolts on his leathery membrane, which sizzled and glowed orange at the points of impact. The attackers moved with disciplined coordination and overlapping fire. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure in customized ebon and brass armor, dropped to the deck and leveled a heavy plasma repeater.
"Amateurs,"
the figure sneered, his voice a synthesized snarl.
"Did you think you could pull this off?"
He raised his weapon and fired a concentrated burst at Grond. The Gestalt roared in pain as the plasma bolt struck him squarely in the chest. His tough membrane cracked, and the colony's thick, viscous violet ichor seeped from the wound. He staggered back, his strength failing him. The leader stepped forward, his helmet retracting to reveal the cruel, multi-eyed face of a Vask. It was Vortok, the notorious bounty hunter and rival operator.
"Thanks for doing the hard work for me," he mocked. "I'll take it from here."
His crew pinned them down with relentless suppressing fire. The roar of plasma drowned out Vetch's panicked shouts about their dwindling chances. Grond fell. Quill was trapped, and their enemies hopelessly outgunned them. Vortok advanced, kicking Jed's cover aside. He grabbed Quill, yanking her up and using her as a shield, pressing the hot barrel of his repeater against his head.
"Drop it, human!"
Vortok snarled, his eyes alight with sadistic glee.
"Or your feathered friend gets a new hole in her head."
Jedediah stood his ground. He fired once, dropping a Vask who was flanking their position. Another shot disabled the rifle of a second. A third ricocheted off the wall, forcing a third to duck back into cover. His fourth round shattered an enemy's faceplate. His fifth punched through the knee of a Vask rushing Grond. He pulled the trigger again. The hammer fell on an empty chamber with a final, hollow click. Vortok laughed, a harsh, grating sound.
"Ha! Out of tricks, old man! Out of bullets!"
Jedediah stood steady. His face was a mask of cold fury. Calmly, he broke open the revolver, the 5 spent casings tinkling as they hit the deck. He moved his hand to the small pouch on his belt. He reached inside and pulled out a single polished brass cartridge. It was his last one. He kept his eyes locked on Vortok. With an unhurried, almost meditative motion, he thumbed the cartridge into the cylinder. He snapped the revolver shut. the sound of the cylinder locking into place echoing the finality of a closing coffin lid. He raised the weapon, leveling it at Vortok and the terrified Quill.
"This is the only one I'll need,"
he said, his voice low and steady. Vortok's laughter died. The human stillness was unnerving, the calm certainty of a predator. Still, he had the advantage, the hostage, the numbers.
"A noble sentiment,"
Vortok sneered, tightening his grip on Quill.
"But you kill her before you ever hit me. My shields will stop that relic slug through her cold."
A faint shimmer of personal energy shielding flickered around his body. Jedediah kept his gaze locked on him, but his focus was elsewhere. He could feel it in the deck plates, in the shift of his own weight, in the deep, groaning protest of the train's structure. He had memorized this section of the track from the map. The sharpest, most severe turn in the Serpent's Coil was coming. The train screamed into the descending turn. The world tilted violently. The train's inertia slammed them hard to the port side of the car. Unsecured equipment crashed against the bulkhead. Vortok, caught off guard by the severity of the lurch, stumbled, his footing compromised for a single crucial instant. It was the opening they needed. Quill, her body pressed against the Vask, reacted with instinct born of desperation. She stomped down hard with all her weight, driving the heel of her boot onto Vortok's instep. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip on her loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. She twisted, dropping low and away from him. In that same instant, Jedediah fired. Time seemed to dilate. The roar of the final round was the only sound that mattered. The bullet flew high and to the left of Vortok, at a point on the wall he had clocked seconds before. The bullet, a simple piece of lead and copper, struck one of the heavy, curved steel support struts that reinforced the train's frame. The bullet screamed off the curved strut, its trajectory altered by a calculated angle. It zipped past Vortok's head, missing him entirely, and struck the pressure release nozzle on the cryo-helium container right next to him. The result was a catastrophic, fireless explosion of pressure. With a soundless roar, the compromised nozzle blew out, a plume of cryogenic gas, instantly turning to white vapor in the warmer air, erupted from the container with the force of a battering ram. The explosive decompression created a localized hurricane in the cramped corridor. The invisible fist of physics slammed into Vortok before he could scream, lifting him off his feet. His personal shield flared and died under the immense kinetic force. The force threw him backward, tumbling loosely through the air, and blasted him clean out through the hole his own crew had made in the roof. His form vanished into the swirling darkness of the canyon below. The corridor fell silent, save for the hissing of the damaged cryo-container and the wail of the wind. Vortok's remaining crew stared, their professional discipline shattered by the violence they had just witnessed. A man with a single bullet had defeated their shielded, heavily armed leader by using the environment, the train, and the cargo itself as a weapon. Grond broke the spell. Pushing himself up on one massive arm, he let out a deep, rumbling growl and charged the nearest Vask. The sight of the wounded and enraged Gestalt, seemingly indestructible, was the final straw. Their leader gone, the remaining rivals hesitated and broke. They scrambled for their ropes, retreating back to their stealth skiff, abandoning the heist and leaving their fallen comrades behind. The battle was over. The train continued its frantic race toward Oxide, but the immediate threat had vanished. Battered and bruised, they stood in the wreckage-strewn corridor. Vetch's frantic, relieved babbling crackled over the comms. Quill got to her feet, her hands shaking, her sharp eyes fixed on Jedediah. He was already moving. He holstered his empty revolver and knelt beside Grond, pulling a med pack from his belt. With a gentle touch, he began tending to the Gestalt's seeping wound, his face a mask of grim focus. They had won, and their quiet, reluctant leader was already patching them up for the next fight. They made it back to the hideout as the twin suns rose, piloting the skiff laden with 2 of the heavy cryo-helium containers. It was a fraction of the total score, but it was more than enough. They had left the train on a deserted stretch of track outside Oxide, wiping their presence clean and vanishing back into the labyrinthine tunnels of the old docking clamp. Grond lay on a large cot, his torn membrane sealed with industrial-grade epoxy and Quill's careful ministrations. He was humming a low, steady tune, a gestalt expression of contentment and healing. Vetch was at his console, with a quiet focus that replaced his usual panicked energy, erasing their digital footprints and securing a buyer for their score on the black market. Quill approached Jedediah, who stood by the entrance, watching the orange light of the new day spill across the dusty floor.
I've confirmed the buyer,
She said,
The credits will be in our London accounts by midday. It's enough. Enough to clear our debts, refuel the ship, buy new identities, enough to start over.
Jed nodded, his gaze distant.
Good.
It's more than good.
Quill pressed, stepping beside him.
It's a miracle. You're a miracle.
She looked at him, a raw sincerity in her expression.
We were dead. Klisk's plan would have killed us, and Vartok would have finished the job. But you saw a different path.
She held out a data chip.
This is the leader's share. 40%. It's yours.
Jedediah looked at the chip, then at her. He shook his head.
I'm not your leader.
The hell you're not.
Quill countered, her voice fierce.
You led us. You saved us. Ground follows you without question. Vetch thinks you're some kind of analog wizard. And me, I've never followed anyone who earned my respect before. There's a place for you here, Jed. A permanent one. We're a loyal crew. We could be a real one.
For the first time since he had walked into the sump, a small, sad smile touched the corner of Jedediah's lips. He looked over at the recovering Grond and the focused Vetch. She offered him more than a cut of the score. It was a home, a family, forged in fire and desperation. It was something, a part of him, a part he had long considered buried, yearned for. He pushed the data chip back toward her.
Take what you need for my fuel and supplies,
he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it.
Split the rest 3 ways. Buy that new start. You've all earned it.
Quill stared at him, her jaw plates working silently.
But where will you go?
Jedediah turned his gaze back to the sunrise.
I have a promise to keep.
He reached up, his fingers brushing against the silver locket beneath his shirt. He looked back at his crew, because for a brief, violent, and vital time, they had been his crew. A functioning, loyal unit stood where a collection of misfits and thieves once had. A pragmatic mechanic, a brilliant if anxious technician, and a steadfast guardian, a living fortress. He gave Quill a single, profound nod of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged.
Stay safe, Quill.
He turned and walked out of the hideout, his duster swirling around him. He strode out into the harsh, beautiful light of the moon's twin sunrise, a solitary figure walking toward his ship, his purpose still his own. Quill, Grond, and Vetch watched him go. They let him go. They just stood in the silence, watching the man who had fallen into their lives, saved them from themselves, and then vanished as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind only a story told in whispers on a dusty rock at the edge of known space.